I was sitting at the vendor table, hiding a cheap polyester dress behind a floral centerpiece, while my new sister-in-law laughed about my pathetic life to a room full of elites. She didn't know the four-star Marine general walking through the double doors was about to salute me. I spend most of my days with dirt packed securely under my fingernails. Working at a sprawling commercial greenhouse just outside of Seattle offers a specific kind of quiet. Plants don't yell. They don't require you to make split-second decisions that alter the course of someone else's life, and they certainly don't ask about your past. For the last 4 years, my world has been measured in pH levels, humidity indices, and the steady, rhythmic labor of repotting ferns. It's a simple life. I chose it on purpose. My older brother Ryan never quite understood my pivot. To him, I went away to the military, did something dangerous that I refused to talk about when I came home, and then buried myself in a greenhouse. But he loved me, in his own oblivious, well-meaning way. He just didn't know how to bridge the gap between my silence and the loud, aggressively ambitious life he was building. That gap widened into a canyon the day he met Abigail. Abigail was the daughter of a prominent defense contractor. She grew up in a world of country club memberships, charity galas, and summer homes in Martha's Vineyard. She was impeccably manicured, spoke in a perpetual tone of gentle condescension, and wore perfume that smelled like money and crushed lilies. From the moment we met, she assessed me, categorized me, and dismissed me. I was the odd, quiet sister who worked manual labor, a minor blemish on Ryan's otherwise upwardly mobile trajectory. The wedding preparations were a 6-month exercise in endurance. "I just think a muted color palette suits you best, Nora," Abigail said to me one afternoon in a bridal boutique that served champagne on silver trays. She held up a bridesmaid dress, the exact color of week-old dishwater. The fabric felt like a cheap umbrella. I looked at the dress, then at her. She was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. The other bridesmaids, childhood friends of hers with identical blowouts and names like Chloe and Madison, were trying very hard to look anywhere else. "Muted," I repeated. "Well, you don't really wear makeup," she said, taking a delicate sip from her crystal flute, "and with your rougher hands and the little scar on your chin. We just want you to feel comfortable, not like you're trying too hard to fit into something you're not." The scar on my chin was a jagged 2-inch line left behind by a piece of shrapnel in Helmand Province. I hadn't told her that. I hadn't told Ryan either, not the specifics. As far as the family was concerned, my time in the Marines was a brief, unremarkable stint in logistics. "The dress is fine, Abigail," I said, taking the plastic hanger. I didn't have the energy for a fight. I had learned a long time ago how to conserve my energy for the battles that mattered. A chiffon dress in a passive-aggressive shade of gray didn't meet the threshold. Ryan cornered me at the rehearsal dinner 2 days before the wedding. We were at a high-end steakhouse downtown, the kind of place where the waiters wear white gloves and sweep the breadcrumbs off the tablecloth with little brass blades. I was sitting at the far end of the table, nursing a club soda, watching Abigail's father, Richard, hold court. Richard was a loud man with a red face and a habit of dropping military jargon into his corporate anecdotes to sound tough. "Hey," Ryan said, sliding into the empty chair next to me. He looked tired, the skin around his eyes tight with stress. "You holding up?" "I'm fine," I said. "Abigail's just stressed," he offered, unprompted. It was a reflex for him now, apologizing for her. The seating chart was a nightmare. Her dad insisted on inviting half the Pentagon. I swear. He's been trying to secure this massive logistics contract with the DoD, and he's using our wedding as a networking event. "It's his dime," I noted. Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know she can be a lot, but she loves me, and it means a lot to me that you're here, Nora. Really. I wouldn't miss it, Rye. And I meant it. He was my brother." But as I watched Abigail across the table, leaning in to laugh loudly at something one of her bridesmaids said while casting a sidelong, dismissive glance in my direction, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. It wasn't hurt. It was the hyper-vigilance of being in a room where you know you are the target. I took a slow breath, letting it out through my nose, grounding my feet flat against the hardwood floor. Just 2 more days, I told myself. Get through the ceremony, eat the dry chicken, and go back to the plants. I didn't realize Abigail had saved her best artillery for the wedding day. The Grand Solstice Hotel was a monument to excessive wealth. The ballroom featured gold-leafed ceilings, chandeliers the size of small cars, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. When I arrived, squeezed into the dishwater dress that was somehow too tight in the shoulders and tragically loose in the waist, the sheer volume of the event hit me like a physical force. There were at least 300 guests. Waitstaff circulated with trays of oysters and caviar. A string quartet played contemporary pop songs in the corner. After the ceremony, during which I was instructed to stand at the very end of the bridal party line, partially obscured by a massive floral pillar, we transitioned to the reception. I found the escort card with my name on it and walked into the ballroom to find my seat. Table D9. I navigated through the maze of silk-draped tables, moving further and further from the front, past the family tables, past the college friends, past the business associates. Table 19 was shoved into a dark corner, right next to the swinging wooden doors of the kitchen. My dining companions consisted of the wedding photographer, who was currently eating a bread roll while reviewing his camera monitor, Abigail's eccentric great-aunt, who was already asleep, and 3 empty chairs. I sat down. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, the clatter of industrial dishwashers and the smell of roasting meat washed over me. Across the room, at the glittering head table elevated on a small riser, Abigail caught my eye. She offered a tiny, triumphant smile, then turned back to whisper something to Ryan, placing her hand delicately on his chest. Ryan didn't look my way. I poured myself a glass of water from the condensation-beaded pitcher on the table. The photographer looked up. "Rough draw?" he asked, gesturing to the swinging doors. "I like the breeze," I replied flatly. Dinner was a blur of speeches, clinking glasses, and Richard loudly boasting to anyone who would listen about his close personal friends in Washington. When the champagne was poured for the final toasts, Abigail took the microphone. She stood at the head table, the spotlights catching the intricate beading of her designer gown. She was radiant, flushed with the absolute power of being the center of attention. She thanked her parents. She spoke tearfully about Ryan. And then, inexplicably, she turned her gaze toward the back of the room, toward the kitchen doors, toward me. "And I want to take a moment to acknowledge Ryan's sister, Nora," Abigail said, her voice amplified, echoing off the gold leaf ceiling. The room shifted. Hundreds of heads turned, trying to locate me in the dim lighting of the corner. I froze, my hand still resting on the base of my water glass. "Nora is so unique," Abigail continued, her tone dripping with a saccharine sweetness that masked the venom perfectly. "While my father is out building international companies, and Ryan is closing real estate deals, Nora reminds us of the simpler things. She works with dirt. Literally." A low ripple of polite, uncomfortable laughter moved through the crowd. "It's just so brave," Abigail said, tilting her head. "To completely reject ambition. To be perfectly content at the bottom of the ladder, bagging fertilizer while the rest of the world moves forward. We can all learn something from someone who requires so little of herself." To Nora, she raised her glass. A few people raised theirs, muttering my name with varying degrees of pity and amusement. My face felt hot. My knuckles, gripping the heavy tablecloth under the table, were white. It was a masterclass in public humiliation. She hadn't said anything overtly cruel. There were no insults a bystander could easily point to, but the implication was clear. "You are a loser. You are nothing. You are a joke to us." I looked at Ryan. He was staring at the table, his jaw tight, completely paralyzed by his new wife's social maneuvering. He wasn't going to say anything. I let go of the tablecloth. I didn't look away from Abigail. I just held her gaze, my face an absolute unreadable mask. In the Marines, you learn how to lock your emotions in a steel box in the back of your brain. You learn how to slow your heart rate when everything around you is screaming. I breathed in the smell of the kitchen grease and the expensive perfume hanging in the air, and I let the noise fade away. Before the uncomfortable silence following the toast could fully settle, a sudden commotion at the main entrance drew the room's collective attention. The heavy mahogany double doors were pulled open by the hotel staff. A murmur swept through the tables nearest the entrance, rippling outward like a stone dropped in a pond. Richard, Abigail's father, practically launched himself out of his chair, nearly knocking over his champagne glass. He hurriedly buttoned his tuxedo jacket, pasting on a wide, eager grin as he rushed toward the doors. Stepping into the ballroom was General Arthur Hayes. Even if you didn't know the military, you knew exactly what this man was. He wore his dress blues, the dark fabric immaculate, the crisp white cover tucked under his left arm. 4 silver stars rested on his shoulders. The left side of his chest was a heavy, colorful mosaic of ribbons, the navy cross, the silver star, the purple heart with multiple oak leaf clusters. He was a tall man, silver-haired, with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen the worst of human history and survived it. He didn't walk, he advanced. There was a quiet, crushing gravity to his presence that made the opulent, noisy ballroom instantly feel small and frivolous. "General Hayes!" Richard boomed, extending both hands as he approached the man. "Richard Sterling, we met at the Bethesda Gala. It is an absolute honor that you could make it to my daughter's wedding. Truly, an honor." General Hayes stopped. He accepted Richard's handshake out of polite necessity, his grip brief. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for the invitation." His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that carried effortlessly without a microphone. "Please, come to the front," Richard insisted, gesturing wildly toward the head table. Abigail was beaming, practically vibrating with the prestige of having a 4-star general at her reception. This was her father's crowning networking achievement. "We have a seat reserved for you right next to my family. I'd love to introduce you to my new son-in-law." General Hayes didn't move toward the front. Instead, his sharp, dark eyes began to systematically scan the ballroom. He bypassed the glittering centerpieces, the wealthy contractors, the politicians, and the bride. He was looking for something specific. I felt the shift in the air before I consciously realized what was happening. My posture straightened. The years melted away, the greenhouse and the dirt fading into the background. The general's eyes swept over the crowded tables, moving deeper into the room, past the dance floor, past the string quartet. Then, his gaze hit the dark corner by the kitchen doors. He stopped. The polite, detached expression on his face dissolved, replaced by a sudden, intense sharpness. The entire ballroom, sensing the shift in the general's attention, followed his line of sight. 300 heads turned once again, looking away from the glittering front of the room, straight to the shadowy vendor table in the back. Straight to me. General Hayes ignored Richard, who was still talking. He bypassed the head table entirely. With measured, deliberate strides, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor, the 4-star commander of the United States Marine Corps began to walk toward table 19. The silence that fell over the ballroom was not just an absence of noise. It was a physical weight pressing down on the space. The string quartet had abruptly stopped mid-measure, the cellist's bow hovering completely motionless over the thick strings. The clatter of plates from the kitchen doors had ceased. 300 pairs of eyes tracked the 4-star commander of the United States Marine Corps as he cut a direct, unhurried path through the maze of silk-draped tables, ignoring the billionaires, the politicians, and the frantic attempts of Richard to regain his attention. General Hayes stopped exactly 3 feet from table 19. I stood up. I didn't have to think about it. Years of ingrained muscle memory simply took over. My spine snapped perfectly straight, my shoulders pulled back, my chin leveled. The cheap, ill-fitting chiffon of the dishwater bridesmaid dress felt entirely irrelevant in that fraction of a second. I wasn't the odd sister hidden in the back corner anymore. I was back in the uniform, even if no one else could see it. General Arthur Hayes stood squarely in front of me. The severe granite features of his face softened just a fraction, a profound, heavy respect settling into the sharp lines around his dark eyes. He didn't offer his hand to shake. Instead, he took a measured half-step back, brought his polished heels together with a sharp, distinct click that echoed like a gunshot in the dead, silent room, and raised his right hand to the brim of his cover in a crisp, flawless salute. A collective gasp, sharp and involuntary, rippled through the front of the ballroom. I heard someone drop a silver fork onto a porcelain plate. A 4-star general saluting a civilian first was an absolute breach of military protocol, unless he was saluting a Medal of Honor recipient, or someone who had earned a reverence that entirely transcended rank and regulation. I brought my hand up and returned the salute, holding the rigid posture until he deliberately dropped his hand. "Captain," Hayes said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried perfectly without the need for a microphone. "General," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline spiking through my veins. "It's been a very long time, Nora," he said, the strict military formality dropping away, replaced instantly by the deep, resonant warmth of a man speaking to someone he fundamentally trusted with his own life. 4 long years. You're a remarkably hard woman to track down these days. I like the quiet, sir, I said, keeping my hands resting loosely at my sides. Hayes offered a small, knowing smile. He turned his head slightly, his sharp gaze sweeping over the opulent room, lingering for a fraction of a second on the extravagant, towering floral centerpieces, before settling back on my face. I heard the speech. From the bride. I felt a sudden flush of heat hit the back of my neck, but I kept my gaze firmly locked on his. Just family dynamics, sir. It isn't important. Dirt, Hayes repeated, his voice suddenly hard enough to cut glass. He didn't yell. He didn't need to raise his volume. The quiet, terrifying danger in his tone made the closest tables physically flinch. He turned slowly, facing the elevated head table where Abigail sat completely frozen, her mouth slightly parted, the expensive champagne glass trembling visibly in her manicured fingers. Richard looked as though all the blood had been drained from his head. The bride mentioned that you work with dirt, Captain, Hayes projected, addressing the entire room but keeping his piercing eyes deadlocked on Abigail. She called it a lack of ambition, a refusal to move forward. I find that assessment incredibly interesting. No one dared to breathe. I looked at Ryan. My brother was staring at me, his eyes wide and terrified, the realization slowly and violently dawning on him that he knew absolutely nothing about the reality of his own sister's life. Let me tell you about the kind of dirt Captain Nora Davis knows, General Hayes continued, his voice echoing off the gold leaf ceiling, demanding absolute attention. 4 years ago, in the Helmand province, my convoy was ambushed during a routine transport. We were pinned down in a fortified trench system, 2 armored vehicles disabled by improvised explosives, 7 men bleeding out in the dirt. The extraction helicopters couldn't land because the hostile fire was too dense. We were cut off, outgunned, and running out of time. Hayes took a slow, deliberate step toward the center of the room, holding the entire space hostage with his presence. Captain Davis wasn't an infantry soldier, she was running logistics. But when our primary medic took a round to the chest, she didn't wait for orders. She grabbed a heavy medical kit, left the relative safety of the armored transport, and dragged herself through 200 yards of mud, shrapnel, and heavy machine gun fire. I looked down at the white tablecloth. I hated this story. I hated the visceral memory of the deafening noise, the metallic smell of copper and cordite, the desperate, clawing heat of that afternoon. She spent 6 brutal hours in that dirt, Hayes said, his voice dropping an octave, heavy with the weight of the memory. She packed open wounds. She applied tourniquets under fire. She fired her service weapon until it completely jammed, and then she picked up a fallen Marine's rifle and kept firing to protect the wounded. She took a piece of hot shrapnel to the jaw and didn't even pause to wipe the blood away. She kept my men alive. She kept me alive. He turned back to face me, his eyes shining with an unspeakable gratitude. For her extraordinary actions in that dirt, she was awarded the Navy Cross. When she finally came home, she resigned her commission because she had seen enough blood and violence to last 3 lifetimes. If she wants to spend the rest of her days planting seeds, nurturing roots, and growing things instead of destroying them, she has earned that quiet right in ways no one sitting in this room could ever possibly comprehend. Hayes turned his dark gaze back to the head table, his expression hardening into pure, unyielding steel. So, when you choose to mock the dirt she works in, you should understand that it is the exact same dirt she willingly bled in, so that you could sit here in your expensive silk dresses and drink your imported champagne in perfect safety. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of deafening quiet that immediately follows a devastating physical blow. Abigail had gone completely pale, her flawless makeup suddenly looking like a cheap mask painted over a ghost. She shrank back into her padded chair, the triumphant, condescending sneer entirely erased from her delicate features. Richard tried desperately to salvage the unsalvageable situation. He took a hesitant, trembling step forward off the riser, his hands raised in a pathetic, placating gesture. General Hayes, please, I beg you. There's been a massive misunderstanding here. We had absolutely no idea. Nora never said a word. She never told us the details about her service. Because true heroes do not feel the desperate need to boast, Richard, Hayes said coldly, stripping away the man's dignity with a single sentence. They do not need to tear others down to artificially elevate themselves. They simply let their actions speak. Hayes did not wait for Richard to stumble through another pathetic, fumbling apology. The general turned his back on the billionaire defense contractor, a deliberate, devastating insult recognized in both the military and corporate worlds. He walked back to table 19, his posture relaxed but commanding. "You haven't even touched your dinner, Captain," Hayes noted mildly, glancing down at the completely untouched plate of dry chicken and wilted asparagus resting in front of me. "I lost my appetite, sir," I admitted, my voice steady. Hayes nodded in understanding. He extended his right arm toward me. "There's a quiet, all-night diner about 3 miles down the coastal highway from here. They serve terrible black coffee and absolutely excellent cherry pie. I would be deeply honored if you would join me. We have a lot of catching up to do." I looked at his offered arm. I looked across the sprawling room at my older brother. Ryan had finally pushed his chair back and stood up. He looked utterly devastated, physically torn between the wealthy, superficial world he had just eagerly married into and the sister he now realized he had completely abandoned to the wolves. He took a half step toward me, his mouth opening to say something my name, an apology, a plea for forgiveness. But Abigail reached out and grabbed his wrist. It was a very small, desperate movement, but I saw it clearly. I saw her grip tighten, her manicured nails digging into his suit jacket, anchoring him to the elevated riser, anchoring him permanently to her. Ryan stopped moving. He looked at her hand, and then he looked at me. He didn't pull away. That single hesitation was all the answer I would ever need. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel the crushing weight of betrayal. I just felt incredibly, wonderfully detached from all of them. The heavy, suffocating burden I had been quietly carrying for 6 months, the desperate need to appease them, the constant effort to shrink myself to fit into their immaculate, sterile world evaporated into the air. "I would love a slice of cherry pie, General," I said warmly. I looped my arm securely through his. The dark fabric of his dress blues was thick and rough beneath my hand, grounded in a harsh reality I intimately understood. Together, we turned and began to walk toward the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the room. The wealthy crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. No one dared to whisper. No one dared to move a muscle. They just silently pulled their chairs in closer to their tables and gave us a wide, intensely respectful berth. As we approached the center of the massive room, Richard made one final, entirely desperate attempt to save his crumbling empire. His massive logistics contract with the Department of Defense was flashing before his eyes, rapidly disintegrating into worthless ash. "General Hayes," Richard pleaded, his voice cracking with panic, stepping directly into our path, ignoring the furious glare of his wife. "Please, I implore you, let me make this right. Let me buy you a drink at the private bar. We can discuss the new supply chain initiatives my company is developing for the Corps. It's groundbreaking work." Hayes stopped walking. He didn't raise his voice, but the sudden chill in his tone could have easily frozen the harbor waters outside. "I do not do business with men who allow their own family to be publicly degraded for sport. Your daughter's vicious character is a direct reflection of your own. The United States Marine Corps has absolutely no need for your logistics, sir. Have a pleasant evening." Richard physically recoiled, stumbling backward as if he had been violently struck across the jaw. He slumped back, leaning heavily against a cocktail table for support, his face pale and slick with cold sweat. The lucrative contract was gone forever. The social prestige was completely gone. The power dynamic in the room had shifted violently, permanently, and entirely out of his control. I didn't bother to look back at Abigail. I didn't look back at Ryan. I kept my eyes focused on the heavy double doors leading out into the quiet lobby. When we pushed through the doors and the heavy mahogany swung shut behind us, completely cutting off the oppressive, suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom, I finally let out a long, slow breath. The empty hotel lobby was wonderfully quiet, smelling faintly of lemon furniture polish and the fresh rain tapping against the glass. General Hayes glanced down at me, a glimmer of genuine amusement returning to his dark eyes. "You know, for someone who actively avoids conflict, you certainly know how to clear a room, Captain." A genuine, uninhibited laugh escaped my chest, the very first real laugh I had produced in over 6 months. It echoed brightly in the vast, empty lobby. "You really didn't have to do that, Arthur." "I didn't do it just for you, Nora," he replied, his tone softening into something deeply paternal. I did it for my men. They wouldn't ever want the woman who saved their lives sitting in the dark back corner by the kitchen, taking fire from a civilian who doesn't understand the terrible cost of the freedom she blindly enjoys. We walked out the main entrance of the Grand Hotel. The eager valet rushed forward, but Hayes waved him off immediately, gesturing toward a sleek black town car waiting faithfully at the curb with a young marine driver standing at perfect attention. The night air was beautifully cool and crisp, carrying the sharp scent of the ocean and wet asphalt. Besides, Hayes added, pulling open the heavy car door for me himself, I really do want some pie, and I desperately need someone to explain to me how to keep my wife's backyard hydrangeas alive. They keep turning brown no matter what I do. I smiled, sliding comfortably into the soft leather seat. It's all about the soil pH, General. You have to balance the acidity before you water them. You'll write the instructions down for me, he ordered gently, getting in beside me and pulling the heavy door shut. The powerful engine purred to life, and the car smoothly pulled away from the Grand Solstice Hotel. I watched the glowing golden lights of the ballroom fade into the dark distance through the tinted glass. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. They were rough, heavily calloused, and deeply scarred. They were the hands of a worker. They were hands that had built things, saved things, and nurtured beautiful life straight from the dirt. They were exactly the hands I wanted. Tomorrow morning, I would go right back to the quiet greenhouse. I would put my bare hands back in the cool, rich soil. But tonight, I was going to eat pie with an old friend. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt perfectly, undeniably at peace. Did this story of unexpected justice and the quiet strength of true heroes resonate with you? Sometimes, the most powerful response to cruelty is simply standing in the truth of who you are. If you loved watching Nora walk away with her head held high, please hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their worth, and subscribe to our channel for more deeply human, grounded stories every single week. Thank you so much.